Morning all, Southy here. So part 3 of my series on the Calder Park Thunderdome and NASCAR racing in Australia. This one's just going to be a brief outline of start to finish, and I'll get into more nitty gritty of bits and pieces in other, but this is the outline. So Bob Jane here in Australia was a very, very successful motor racer and businessman. He started out as a successful push bike racer, boxer, and businessman. He invented, he and his brother Bill invented the old pull-on nylon seat covers that, I don't know whether you had them anywhere else in the world, but in the 70s here in Australia, everyone had them in their cars. You bought them in a plastic bag at the service station, you stretched them over the seats in your car, and yeah, so that was Bob's start. He won Australian championships as a race car driver, won some of the biggest races here in Australia, and he used his fame as a race car driver to start a tyre business called Bob Jane T-Marts, which he franchised, and it became one of the most successful franchise operations in the world. Their big claim when they were getting people to get their own franchise with the one that they'd never had one gone broke. It was the only franchise business in the world that one of the stores that never fell over. I think at one stage they had around 100 stores here in Australia, so it was a big deal. And he owned racetracks too. He owned Hume Weir, Adelaide International Raceway, which had a circuit racing flat track, a half-mile oval exactly the same as Martinsville, and a dragway as well. And he also owned Calder Park, which was a dragway and a flat track circuit racing facility, and that's where he built the Thunderdome. He had been to America and saw NASCAR and just thought it was the ant's pants and it would do well in Australia, so he had meetings with Bill France Jr. and did a deal for NASCAR to sanction him to run NASCAR events here in Australia. So the first major event was in February 1988, and was won by Neil Bonnet. And here's a list of this is the finishing order of that race. Neil Bonnet first, Bobby Allison second, third was Dave Marcus, fourth Glenn Sturer, fifth Summer McKnight, 6th Herschel McGriff, 7th Terry Pentris, 8th Chad Little, 9th Jim Danielson, 10th with Kyle Petty, 11th was their first Australian, which was Robin Best, who went on to win the first 2 Australian NASCAR championships driving ex-Junior Johnson cars. The one who won the first one in was actually the car that Darrell Waltrip won the very first All-Star race in. Ruben Garcia was 12th, 13th was Jerry Churchill, 14th was Mikey Waltrip, 15th Bob Howard, 16th Dave Scosby, 17th Jim Richards. Jim Richards is another Aussie. He was a very successful circuit racer here in Australia, but he's started out, his roots were dirt track speedway guy from New Zealand. 18th Ron Esdew, 19th Gary Collins, 20 Dick Johnson. Dick Johnson's a guy who raced circuit racing guy, Australian touring car guy, won one or two, I'm not sure, Australian touring car championships, and also won Bathurst a couple of times, I believe. Alan Grice, another Australian touring car guy. Brad Nofskinger was 22nd. 23rd, Harry Gulati. Number 24, John Laws. John Laws and Ken Laws are two dirt track legends from Australia, dirt track speedway legends. They raced, all over the place in late models and sedans. Terry Byers, another dirt track guy from Wollongong, actually originally from Yass, where I come from. 26 was Bill Venturini. I think you all know who Bill is from his ARCA and other stuff that he still does in the States. Pretty successful at his development programs in America. 27th is Rick McRae. 28th was Gary Rush. Gary Rush is 10-time Australian sprint car champion. 29th is Ron Cribbs. 30th was Bill Schmidt. 31st, John Spanoff. John Spanoff is a bit of a funny one. He was self-proclaimed bit of a legend. He just had a bit of a crack at everything, but he only ran once here in Australia and then had a couple of runs in the States. He was actually the first Australian to run in America. And then 32 was St. James Davis, yeah. So that was the first race. And then we had another major race, which was our first $1 million event in December in 88. And then after that, things sort of really started happening for having our championship. Things really picked up in about 1990 when we started getting really big crowds. Our biggest crowd came in 1991, in October 91. We had 56,000 people for the race on the Sunday, about 35,000 for practice and qualifying on Saturday. It was a huge event here in Australia to pull those sort of numbers. Considering up until then, our biggest motorsport on bitumen or asphalt was the Australian Touring Car Championship. With people in America and anywhere else won't know these guys, but we had these guys like Peter Brock and Dick Johnson and Glenn Seaton and all these people were the drivers, and they were big names in Australia in that field. They had 1,400 people at Winton. At the same time, we had 56,000 for the NASCAR. So we were really kicking goals. So that's how it all got started. Bob got permission of Bill France Jr. to kick things off. Bill signed off on it, and we had NASCAR racing in Australia, and that's sort of how it all got started. Some of the other drivers, I just mentioned a bunch of Americans, but we had other guys like Rodney Combs, who was probably the most successful American to race down here. Terry Fisher. Who else do we have? Dick Trickle, Kenny Schrader. I've got a great story about Kenny Schrader that I'll tell during the series. Terry Labonte, he won a race in 1990 here. Doug Taylor, another guy from the States who did really well. He actually set the first ever 27-second lap around the Thunderdome when we converted to radial tyres. Morgan Shepherd, Tracy Leslie. Tracy was crazy fast. This guy was the most devastatingly fast car we ever had on the track. He was unbelievable. Jerry Bowers. So had a lot of Americans come out and race with us over the years, which was great. And but anyway, that's a bit of a short outline of how things kicked off and how things started down here. And yeah, we were really kicking goals there for a while. From 1990 until about 95, we were the biggest show in town. We were really doing well. Anyway, more to come. Cheers, everyone.